We're going to start our discussion of Jainism by mentioning a phrase that's I'm going to talk about from time to time when talking about some of these Eastern religious traditions. And it also has something to do with some of the Western traditions, and that's called the Axial Age. The Axial Age is a period of time between about 800 and 200 BCE. And this period of time was noticed by scholars who gave it this name. It was noticed that there were many religious innovations that took place during this time. And for example, this is the time that the Buddha lived. It's the time that Zoroaster lived. It's after the time of Moses. However, it is the time when Judaism gains many of its current shapes. It's the time of the first temple and the building of the second temple as well. And so this is a very pivotal period in history. Another thing that happens during the Axial Age in India is a rise of the movement called the Shramana movement. Now, when we talk about Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, we're going to be using quite a number of Sanskrit terms, and I'm going to write them up here. They'll also be on the class website. There's a link called Important Terms for Unit 2, and they will all be listed in there as well and defined. So, during the Axial Age, there was a movement called Shramana, spelled like this. The Shramana movement was a religious movement that was parallel to the rise of the traditional Vedic religion that gave rise to Hinduism, but it's distinct from it. Now, eventually the two blended together to form modern-day Hinduism and some of the other religious traditions we'll talk about. But the Shramana movement comes from a Sanskrit word, Shramana, that means one who strives or a laborer. And it was used originally of these wandering ascetic monks and nuns, people who wandered about. The word ascetic means someone who deprives themselves of comfort, eating luxurious food, drinking wine, living in a house, maybe having fine clothes. All of those things ascetics shun, and many ascetics, particularly in the Shramana movement, they would wander from place to place, and they would get their food mostly by begging. And you see something like this, for example, within Christianity in the some of the monastic movements that arose in the Middle Ages, the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, for example. At any rate, the Shramana movement, that's long after the Shramana movement, though. The Shramana movement led to the development and propagation of many separate but somewhat related ideas. So the Shramana movement includes the idea of ahimsa. This means nonviolence. This A on the front means not. So nonviolence, that is literally, it means do not injure. So nonviolence is part of the Shramana movement, and it means nonviolence not only towards other human beings, but also to other sentient beings, and by that they mean animals, all animals. Another characteristic of the Shramana movement was the idea of samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. It's generally called in the West reincarnation. The Sanskrit word for that is samsara. It says that you live your life and then you die and then you are given a new body. You're reborn into a different body and you live it again and again and again. And the cycle of life just continues seemingly indefinitely unless you can figure a way out of it. All right? Related to the concept of samsara is the concept of karma. Karma are deeds that give rise to samsara. In other words, as you go throughout your life, if you do things that would be considered bad in Jainism or in the Shramana religions, religions that incorporate Shramana into their belief system, if you do something bad, you accumulate karma, and the karma means that you can't escape the cycle of samsara, the cycle of reincarnation. So you're going to be born again. In the West, we sometimes think of reincarnation as, oh, this is a good thing. It means I get to live my life again. But in the East, samsara, reincarnation, is seen as something to be avoided, something that people try to escape from. We talked about theodicy and the notion of the justice of God, and the fact that the differentiated afterlife is one solution, one possible solution to the notion of the justice of God, and the idea that God is just, God is all-powerful, but evil exists in the world. And so the differentiated afterlife, heaven and hell, gives rise to a place where justice can be delivered in the next world. Well, another possible solution is reincarnation, rebirth, that if you do bad things in this life, you'll be reborn in a lower state. If you do good things in this life, you'll be reborn at a higher state. So this is another possible solution to the concept of theodicy, the idea of the justice of God, or justice of the gods, or justice of the universe. So a final concept that's related to this Shramana movement is asceticism, which I've already mentioned. Asceticism, denying good things or pleasurable things to oneself. So the Shramana movement gave rise to and was incorporated into a number of religious movements in and around India, including Jainism, Buddhism, and also Hinduism to a somewhat lesser extent, as we'll see when we get to Hinduism. Okay, so let's talk about Jainism. There are two important figures in the axial age that are related to Jainism. The first is named Parshva. Parshva is the 23rd Tirthankara. Right, Tirthankara. And Tirthankara is a Sanskrit word that just means, literally in Sanskrit, it means a ford builder. You know, when you create a ford across a river, it's a place you can cross a river safely. Well, the Tirthankaras were people who were believed to construct a path through the great ocean, the great world ocean of worldly life, and they would kind of forge a path for others to follow. So Parshva was the 23rd Tirthankara. His dates are about 800 to 700 BCE. And then the 24th Tirthankara, and this is Mahavira. He's the 24th. And his dates are, let's see, 500, around 500 to 400 BCE. So it's possible that Mahavira was a contemporary of the Buddha. All right. So Parshva and Mahavira are seminal figures within Jainism. You notice I said that the 23rd and 24th Tirthankaras, they have a list. The Jains have a list of all 24 Tirthankaras, and they are the Tirthankaras within this world cycle. And this world cycle, according to Jainism, lasts 126,000 years. And these are the last two. Now, many scholars would say that they're the only, of the list of Tirthankaras, these are the only ones that actually existed, or at least they're the only ones we have any historical information about. Well, we'll talk more about them in a minute. I first wanted to introduce you to one other Sanskrit word, one other for now, and that's the word dharma. D-H-A-R-M-A. Dharma is a word that, a Sanskrit word that can be translated as law in a universal or abstract sense, and it has to do with proper behavior, maintaining order in the universe. It's sort of similar in this way to the Greek word logos, as it was used by some of the ancient Greek philosophers, the Stoics, and so forth. The concept of dharma is, on a human level, encompasses ideas like duty, religion, and justice. Dharma can also apply to inanimate objects, describing their natural properties and actions. And so religions that originated in the Indian subcontinent and that have dharma as one of their organizing principles are sometimes called the dharmic religions, and they include Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. All right. Now, Jainism, before you entered this class, I always ask this in class, but since I'm not doing it face to face, I always ask people before you got to this class, how many of you have ever heard of Jainism? Usually I'll get a handful, one or two people raise their hand, maybe three or four. Jainism is sometimes called the oldest world religion that no one knows about, at least in the West. It's largely unknown in the West. It derives from a Sanskrit word jin, J-I-N, which means to conquer, and it refers to conquering your own passions, your own bodily pleasures. In this sense, we might compare it with the Arabic word jihad, which means struggle, not usually in a physical sense, but an inner struggle to conquer your own passions. Well, that's what jin is, the word jin in Sanskrit, and this gives rise to the word Jainism. The one who conquers and wins this battle is called a Jina in Sanskrit, or in English, a Jain. All right? So Jains believe that their religion has always existed with no beginning or end. As I said, they identify 24 Tirthankaras. These are human beings who have achieved a state of Kavala Jnana. Kavala Jnana. And those are two Sanskrit words that mean absolute knowledge. Jnana means knowledge, and Kavala means of everything. So absolute knowledge of the soul, they achieve it. So they have absolute knowledge of their own souls, and they help others attain both enlightenment and liberation. The word for liberation is moksha. And liberation in Jainism and in the other dharmic religions, liberation means liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Liberation from samsara. So these Tirthankaras who achieve Kavala Jnana, absolute knowledge, or omniscience, that's another way to translate it, omniscience, these are people who not only know their own, have a complete understanding of their own inner selves, but they also know their own pasts and futures. Well, their own past, they understand their own past lives, and they also understand the future and past lives of other people they come into contact with. When they say omniscience, they mean omniscience. All right, I mentioned these two people, Parshva and Mahavira. Let me tell you what we know about them historically. Parshva was born into a royal family in India, in Varanasi in northern India. Around the age of 30, he renounced the world and became a monk, so he was part of this Shramana movement. He led a monastic order with many followers, and his followers were both, some of them were ascetic and some of them were lay followers. Not everyone who's a Jain is an ascetic. Jainism wouldn't propagate itself if there weren't any children born. So there are both monks or ascetics and lay followers of Jainism, and they both have a role to play in Jainism. According to tradition, Parshva achieved moksha, that is liberation from samsara, at the age of 100. Many scholars consider him to be the actual founder of Jainism, even though Jain tradition says he's 23rd, Tirthankara. Mahavira was also born into a royal family in the city called Bihar in northeastern India. He may have been a contemporary of the Buddha, as I said a while ago. At the age of 30, remember Parshva at the age of 30 renounced the world, Mahavira as well. Think of somebody like Jesus at about the age of 30. That's when he began his public ministry. There's all these tie-ins with all these different major world religions. And not to say that they're identical, they're definitely not. But it's interesting some of the similarities that we see. Muhammad was 40 when he began receiving the revelations from the angel Jibril. So, relatively young men, not youths by any means, not just kids, but, beginning of mature adulthood in all these cases. All right, back to Mahavira. He, at the age of 30, after having been married and fathering a daughter, he left his home to pursue spiritual awakening. He joined a group of ascetic followers of Parshva, and eventually he left the group and wandered around the land naked for 12 years. You may say that's a very strange thing to do, that's very extreme. Well, Jainism, at least the ascetics in Jainism, can be rather extreme individuals. So he wandered the land naked for 12 years. Although I will say that in the Bible, the prophet Isaiah is said to have wandered the land naked. It wasn't for 12 years. It was for a shorter period of time. So it's not maybe quite as surprising as you think it is. So in the 13th year of wandering, he achieved Kavala Jnana, or omniscience. And I guess he put clothes back on at that point too. And after this point, he traveled throughout India for the next 30 years, teaching the tenets of Jainism. He had 11 disciples, pretty close to the 12 that Jesus had, all of whom achieved Kavala Jnana eventually as well. The last person to achieve Kavala was a man by the name of Jambu, 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 and he was the last person to achieve Kavala in this world cycle of 126,000 years. Mahavira died at the age of 72, having achieved, the way they would say it is he achieved moksha at the age of 72. He also achieved nirvana. And when you achieve moksha, you're delivered from the cycle of rebirth, samsara, and what happens to your being? You go to a place called nirvana, which is outside the rule of samsara, outside the tyranny of samsara. You're released. You achieve moksha. Now, I'm not going to read all of this, but there's in the class notes for Unit 2, there's a section from the Kalpa Sutra that describes the life of Mahavira after he achieved Kavala Nirvana. I'll just read a little bit of it here. Henceforth, the venerable ascetic Mahavira was houseless, circumspect in his walking, circumspect in his speaking, circumspect in his begging, circumspect in his accepting anything. I will point out here, I'm going to stop here, I'll let you read the rest of it on your own, but circumspect in his begging. In many cultures around the world, begging is seen to be a negative thing. Those who beg are looked down upon. And then in other cultures, like in Jainism, for example, begging is something considered to be very worthwhile. It's something that means you've given up your whole life in order to achieve spiritual knowledge, and the fact that you're willing to do that makes you a very good person. So it's interesting to see how begging is looked upon in different cultures. Now, Jainism became the dominant religion throughout northern India and also parts of southern India during much of the period between the 5th century BCE, that is the time of Mahavira, and the 8th century CE. So for a period of about 1,300 years, Jainism was the dominant religion in parts of India, many parts of India. And this is, keep in mind, this is while Buddhism is going strong, Hinduism is going strong, yet Jainism had the upper hand for over 1,000 years. Eventually, the religion began to decline in numbers, beginning in the 8th century CE, due to a number of reasons. Rivalries with other religious traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, loss of royal patronage, fragmentation of the religious community of Jainism. And then there were Muslim conquests that took place after this that also prohibited the rebounding of Jainism. The Muslims controlled much of northern India and western India for a time. In fact, what is today modern-day Pakistan and Bangladesh is controlled by Muslims. These are Muslim states today, and originally it was all of these states, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, were all considered part of India. Today there are between about 4 and 5 million Jains, mostly in India, but there are some in the UK, Canada, Kenya, in Africa, and the United States. There are 2 major branches of Jainism. One is called Digambara, and the other is called Svetambara, and you can look in the class notes for how to spell those. The Digambara monks wear no clothes, so just like Mahavira wandered about for 12 years, the Digambara monks wear no clothes. Well, since in Indian tradition, women are not allowed to go around naked, the nuns in this tradition wear a white garments, white robes, but because they don't go about naked, they're considered to be inferior to the monks, the men. That's the Digambara tradition within Jainism. In the Svetambara tradition of Jainism, both monks and nuns wear white robes, and women are considered to be equal to men. And the Svetambara Jains believe that the 19th Tirthankara who was named Malinatha, was actually a woman. And both branches of Jainism, the ascetics beg for food, and those who are lay followers of Jainism, they see it as their duty to give food to those who are begging so that they can achieve moksha, liberation, eventually. All right, there are several doctrines within Jainism. These are listed in the class notes, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. Ahimsa, nonviolence, we've already talked about that. That is a very serious consideration within Jainism. And for the Jains, it's not only nonviolence towards humans, but towards all living creatures. So Jains will often wear a mask, even in pre-COVID times. They will wear a mask so they don't accidentally inhale a gnat, a bug of some sort. And they will put filters on their food, covering on their food, and they're vegetarians, of course. They don't kill animals. But they want to put covers on their food so when they're drinking anything that's liquid, they don't accidentally ingest a bug of some sort. And they strain their water so they don't accidentally swallow them. Remember we talked about karma. For Jains, karma is a matter of actions rather than intent. So even if you accidentally step on a bug or accidentally swallow a bug, you didn't intend to do it, but it's your actions that matter, and that brings karma upon you. And so karma is seen in slightly different ways in some of these dharmic religions, and we'll talk about how Buddhism and Hinduism have different views of karma. But in Jainism, anything you do, whether you intend to do it or not, if it's negative, if it causes violence to creatures, living creatures, then that earns you some karma. Jains believe in non-absolutism. They respect the views of others. Non-possessiveness, detachment from possessions. That's similar to Buddhism, the idea of detachment. They have a cyclical view of time. As I said, they believe in 6 ages of 21,000 years apiece. So each large cycle makes up 126,000 years. Compare this with the Maya and the cycle of years, the Mayan calendar. They believe that the universe is unimaginably vast, yet it's finite, and it consists of 3 regions. There's the middle realm, which is where Earth is, India. That's where Jainism arose. But then there's an upper region, might call it heaven, place of the gods, and a lower region that we might call hell. And beings who are born into, after rebirth, they're born into either heaven or hell, only stay there for a relatively short period of time, and then they're reborn as well. You have to achieve moksha from the middle realm. There are 2 categories of existence according to James. There's jiva and ajiva. Remember, a means not. Jiva and ajiva. Those jiva means soul, and so there are beings with souls, that is life, and there are beings that don't have souls, so inanimate objects. Right? The goal of life for Jains is liberation, moksha, and salvation from samsara. Now, you'll notice that we've talked all this time about Jains and we haven't said anything about gods. The Jains believe in gods. They believe in many different gods. However, for Jainism, the gods play no role in human salvation. Human salvation is something that must be achieved by humans themselves through human effort. Now, that doesn't mean that Jains don't worship the gods. The gods can be helpful in providing rain for the crops or answering prayers to heal sicknesses and things like this. But the gods don't really help with salvation. Or, on the other hand, you don't sin against the gods. You sin when you sin by doing something of violence, whether intentional or not. You do so against the universe in general, not against the gods. Kavala is omniscience that leads to moksha, and so the goal is to achieve this ultimate knowledge. And one who has achieved Kavala goes on living in the world of samsara until they die, and at the point of death they achieve moksha. So when they gain omniscience, they spend the rest of their life teaching others, and then they die and they go to nirvana. Let's see, I've already talked about karma in Jainism. There are the 3 jewels of Jainism: right faith, right knowledge, jnana, and right practice. And these 3 function together like the legs of a stool to help Jains move towards moksha or liberation. And although the last thing I'm going to say about the doctrines of Jainism, although Jamba was the last Jain in the world to achieve Kavala, later Jains seek heavenly rebirth by eliminating karma. So they try to eliminate karma from their lives by avoiding killing things, even bugs, small creatures, accidentally. Jains see rebirth as occurring immediately after death. So as soon as you drop dead, you are reborn somewhere else in some other body. Unlike Hindus and Buddhists who believe that the soul or the being persists in a state of death for some period of time before being reborn. For Jains, it happens immediately, and so they see no need for elaborate rituals for the dead. And remember that for the Jains, karma involves acts, not intent. The Jain ascetics practice 5 great vows, and these again are listed in the class notes. The 5 great vows that Jain ascetics practice are ahimsa, nonviolence, abstaining from lying, do not take what has not been given, it's like don't steal, right? Renouncing sexual activity, and renouncing possessions. So all this is involved in, or these last 2 or 3 anyways, are involved in the practice of asceticism. And then finally, there are 6 obligations of ascetics. Equanimity, balance of mind, right? This is achieved through meditation. The praise of the Tirthankaras, their ancestors in the faith, who achieved Kavala Jnana, veneration of their teachers, repentance, laying down the body, and this is in other words, kind of self-discipline of the body. They will either stand or sit motionless for long periods of time in order to maintain discipline over their body. And their sixth obligation of ascetics is abandonment, that is, renunciation of specific food or activities for certain periods of time. Think about it as the Jain version of Lent in the Catholic faith. Now, there are some Jain ascetics who end their lives with a fast to death, and this is seen as an effective means of eliminating karma. This is discouraged by secular authorities today in India, but it still happens from time to time. The problem with continuing, I mean, even for ascetics, even when you continue to eat and you're eating just vegetables or fruits, things like that, you still run the risk of accidentally ingesting some living creature. And so if at the end of life they stop eating and drinking at all, they feel like this is an effective way to purge their bodies of certain amounts of karma prior to death. As I said, the Jain lay people also see themselves as having an important role to play in Jainism by supporting these ascetics so that they can do their thing. The idea is that the lay people perhaps will be reborn as someone who will become an ascetic, and in another life they would hope that someone would give them alms, give them something to eat so that they can achieve moksha themselves. Let's see. The Jains sometimes are involved in pilgrimages to one of 5 sacred mountains or to a sacred shrine. I mentioned that Jains are vegetarians. They also tend to avoid, even though they're vegetarians, they also avoid eating foods like eggs, which come from animals. And they also avoid fruits and vegetables that have a large number of seeds. That's kind of interesting. So melons, watermelons, things like that, other kinds of melons that have lots of seeds. They try to avoid eating these so that they don't destroy life unnecessarily. If you're interested in this, you can read about the Manichaeans, that St. Augustine was a member of the Manichaean group for a while. They also avoided eating fruits. They also were vegetarians and avoided eating fruits with a lot of seeds. And they probably got this idea from people to the east. Very likely were Jains or people who shared similar beliefs. So that's all I'm going to say about Jainism. And these are just the 2 videos for this week, one on Baha'i and one on Jainism. Remember that you need to complete your exam by the date on the class website, your Unit 1 exam this week on the Western religious traditions.